Hi there, I'm Daniel Markham. I wrote the domain model for domain modeling. I'm here today to talk about retrospectives. I think the problem with retrospectives is that they've been done to death and nobody knows how to do them. Both of those statements are true at the same time. Very common question I get as a coach is, how do we do better retrospectives? And a very common thing coaches say is that the core activity of a team is doing retrospectives. Those things are, it's true, you have to do better retrospectives, and it's a core activity. It's also complete bullshit. Let me explain why. Give me 10 minutes. This is my little clicker. It's not seem to be working. I would now click the other way. Okay. So we're starting this with an axiom. The axiom is we succeed when we all use the same language to describe the problem we're solving. It's very important to accept this axiom. If you don't accept it, then the rest of this deck won't make any sense to you. And there's some cool stuff at the end, so you should think about it. The key point is if people are paying you to do things, if you're trying to provide value in the world, then when everybody agrees on what you're trying to do, then you'll succeed. But that's sufficient, right? But not necessary. In a perfect world, if we have all of this, if we have a common, deep understanding of what it means to succeed, there are really only three reasons you can fail. We don't have the authority, right? One person's trying to sabotage it. In that case, you have to vote them off the island, or it's simply impossible, right? I think people kind of default to, well, it's impossible, and then you end up with like teams that can't make the third report column extra wide because, oh, that's impossible. Probably not so much. We're all in this together, so we succeed when we all use the same language to describe the problem we're solving. That's the core of any retro, right? Here are three examples to illustrate that. I'm not going to go into a deep explanation of why this is true. There's a whole book for that. I'm going to keep banging on that nail for a long time. But let's assume the team needs some new tools. Well, Git's much better than Subversion. It's retrospective number 17. For 17 retrospectives, we've been saying, dudes, we really need Git, not Subversion. And then somebody says, what the hell is the purpose of doing retrospectives? Why do we even bother telling people how we need to succeed or move forward? Nothing ever happens. Okay, well, who's paying you, right? Does that person understand that Git is a key metric for success? Is a tool you need? Probably not. That person has one definition of success, you have another. Hello? Back to the original slide here. Say a developer uses technology in a way that everybody else says seems kind of weird. Okay. Let me give you a more concrete example. Let's say we have a meeting where we say we're going to use good variable names. I'm going to use scare quotes. Let's all use good variable names. Everybody says, that's a great idea. Who wants to use bad variable names? Everybody nods their head. We're all happy. And then code review 4 weeks, 2 months, a year later, suddenly we're looking at like COBOL database table names for variables. What the hell's going on? To one person, this was a good variable name. To another person, it wasn't. It's not like we disagreed on the fact we needed to use good variable names. We simply had a different definition of what that meant. So multiple vendors create these beautiful components that do exactly what they're supposed to do. Yet when you put them together, it takes like 20 years to make the system work. So are these vendors evil? No. Is the customer stupid? No. The customer had a definition of success that somehow got lost on the way down to the component vendors. They did exactly what they were asking. They have well tested, beautifully coded components that don't do a damn bit of good for the customer. Definitions. We succeed when we have a common understanding of the problem we're solving. So that one note here, when I use the problem we're solving, it could mean two things. It could mean like the overall problem, like, are we trying to solve world hunger or just getting paid next week? Good question. The second type of this question is, how do we fix the next most important thing we need to fix? Both of those are perfectly fine definitions of the problem we're solving. Don't get hung up on it. They're both fine. So here are the three, and only three, questions I believe any retrospective has to answer. 1. What's really going on here? 2. Can somebody please give me a hand? And 3. Did I screw that up? My premise to this whole 10-minute deck, whatever you're doing with the retrospective, those are the three questions. What's really going on here? There's a whole bunch to unpack. We could go for this whole thing's a book, maybe a series of books. To mention a couple things, it's like, what sort of epistemological domain are you in? Simple, complex, complicated? Thanks, Dave Snowden. Cynefin—it's a great thing to learn, but that's not the end of it, right? What's the relative importance of things? How do you triage stuff? At some point, you're going to have disagreements that you can't answer. Sometimes very early on, sometimes later. At that point, you have to do what I call the dumb questions Olympics, which means your job as a team is not to sort of agree on things, right? So if it were to agree on things, somebody would just come with a big stick and whack people. We'll be done. It would be fun if you had the big stick. I don't know. I would not want to be whacked with the big stick. But that's not the job of a team. Your job is to try to find the simplest, dumbest question that actually covers an important disagreement or lack of knowledge in the team. That is freaking awesome. Once you find that, then the work revolves around finding the answer. So what's really going on here is the critical question, but you have to do a lot of work to get to that. And there's a whole book. There's a bunch of stuff going on here, along with it has to do with analysis, structured analysis, cool stuff, but not relevant here. My point being, if you don't know what's going on, then how could you want to do it better? Somebody give me a hand. If you can't ask for help, how can we help one another? The first question, what's going on here, is an understanding language question. Again, it gets to Wittgenstein and language games. The second question really is more about, and the third question is more about how do we work with one another. So that first question, the reason there's so much depth there is because it deals with how we learn, whether it's one person or 1,000 person. The second question also has a lot of depth, but it has to deal with how we approach the people we work with. You can look at improv, you can look at SEAL teams, you can look at a whole bunch of different examples of how do I ask for and get help. The goal, ideally, is that you don't ask, right? You need help, help arrives. That may never happen, I don't know. That's the goal. Third question, did I screw that up? Can you admit that you have a weakness? Can you ask people to please provide feedback? Can the people you're with provide honest feedback? Those are all really good questions. I mean, critical for team success. If you can't say, did I screw that up, and get a good answer, we don't have a team. You just have a bunch of people reporting to you or whatever. Right? So the key takeaway, I know you've been here for a few minutes, is that this is not fluff. I mean, I know that it sounded like fluff, the 3 questions and Axiom and SEAL teams and all that kind of usual business school bullshit. But it's not fluff. Actually, there are 3 questions. And these 3 questions, no matter how you chop it, have to be answered in a retrospective, right? If you're trying to make your team perform better, you had better have some good game around these 3 questions. So you don't get them from some sort of pin the tail on the consultant game or juggling. I love games, guys. I mean, I love doing interactive, fun stuff. Let's do more of that, right? But it really doesn't do jack shit unless you understand why you're doing it, right? And it's to these 3 questions. So, if you're a leader, if you're a team, you have to look at these 3 areas and actively monitor them. That they're not going to improve on their own. It's not like if let me be direct. It's not like if everybody were happy, somehow these 3 things would be correct, right? In fact, if these 3 things are working very well, everybody may be extremely unhappy. So you can't judge how well you're doing team development for how enjoyable the activities are or how happy people are. You may have a very tough problem that sucks. In that case, that's what it is. You still have this work to do. So my last point, and I know I sound sort of bombastic, but this is a little test video for me. A formal retrospective is a failure. It's a complete failure, and you should always remember it is. These 3 questions are things you should be doing minute to minute with your team. If you have to have a separate meeting or a separate process or some kind of weird game with post-its and people wear hats or whatever, something is wrong. And that separate meeting and the post-its and the hats and all that crap, that's not going to fix it, right? So a formal retrospective, and it may be needed. I'm not saying it's not going to be needed. But if you've got to take some time to figure out what you're doing that's wrong, and you're surprised at somehow at the answers, it's already a fail, right? In fact, it's so much a fail, I personally don't believe you can take an extremely dysfunctional team and do some sort of magic retrospective. It's going to fix that. That's totally whack. It doesn't make any sense at all to me. It doesn't track my experiences. So these are my questions. This is what I believe the purpose of a retrospective is. There are 3 separate skill areas we can develop. There's hours and hours and books and stuff and lots of fun be had in all 3 of those areas. But and there's nothing wrong with whatever games you want to do. Have fun with it. But if you don't understand that you're working on these 3 areas, how can you ever expect to actually do good retrospectives? I'm Daniel Markham. I will see you on the internet.